There are 89 chapters in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And in those 89 chapters, there's 3,779 verses that teach us all about the life of Jesus, his birth, his teachings, his miracles, his fulfillment of prophecies, his arrest, his death, and his resurrection. Yet in all 3,779 verses, there is only one verse where Jesus tells us about his heart. And when he does it, he says it in just two words. Two words. Do you have any guess what those words might be? Well, let's open our Bibles and find out. Today we're going to be looking at Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 through 30, but the verse where Jesus tells us about his heart is verse 29. Jesus said, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Did you catch what those two words were? In verse 29, Jesus says, "I am gentle and lowly in heart." Well, let's look at those two words one at a time. Let's start with the word gentle. You know, of all the words that Jesus could use to describe himself, this is the first one he chose, which is, in my opinion, a bit surprising. Jesus is God. He has absolute power and authority. He is unlimited in any and everything. And when I think about Jesus, other words might be like almighty or majestic, exalted, holy, righteous, eternal. But Jesus says gentle. In other words, Jesus is saying at his very core, at the very root of who he is not harsh. He's not critical. He's not bitter. He's not explosive. He's not hardened. He's not unkind. He's not manipulative. He's gentle. As one person has put it, Jesus is the most understanding person in the universe. Jesus is the most understanding person in the universe. Now, the person who has that quote, his name is Dane Ortlund, and he's written a wonderful book called Gentle and Lowly. And in fact, as we go through this teaching for the next month or so about the heart of Jesus, we'll be looking at this book from time to time. He does such a beautiful job in capturing the heart of Jesus. Now, when Jesus says he's gentle, it's not just empty words. His life demonstrates it. There's integrity in Jesus, and that what he says and what he does match. So let's turn to the Gospels. And when we turn to them, we see that whenever Jesus encounters suffering, his natural response, his default kind of position was to meet it with incredible tenderness. Jesus always meets suffering with gentleness and tenderness. In Matthew 8, there's a leper who comes to Jesus and he says, "Lord, if you're willing, you can make me clean." And Jesus' response was, "I am willing." And he so graciously and tenderly puts a hand on this leper who had not felt human touch in probably years. There's a servant of this Roman centurion, and he's suffering, he's paralyzed, and he's near death. And a call goes out, would Jesus help him? Would Jesus come? And Jesus says, "I will go. I will heal him." There are four friends who were trying to bring their friend to Jesus so that he might heal him. And they dig a hole through the roof and they lower Jesus down because there's a big crowd. And when that happens, Jesus doesn't even wait. He doesn't even wait for the request to heal this man. He forgives him his sins and he heals him of whatever's caused his paralysis. It's like Jesus, his heart was just bursting out, in the moment, and he couldn't be held back. He just had to heal. He just had to forgive. Jesus is traveling around in Matthew 9, and so when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them. Why? It says because they were harassed and helpless. In Matthew 14, Jesus says he has compassion and he heals the sick. Matthew 15, Jesus feeds the hungry with the multiplying of the loaves and the fish because he had compassion on them. Wherever Jesus goes, wherever there is suffering, wherever there is hurting, he is gentle and tender and compassionate. But what about our sins and our failures and our moral shortcomings? How does Jesus respond to those? Well, let's think about the woman who was caught in adultery. And Jesus says, whoever hasn't sinned, cast the first stone, and they all leave. And Jesus, who would be able to cast the first stone, doesn't. And he says, does anyone condemn you? And she said, no. And he says, well, then neither do I. But go and sin no more. Let's think about Peter, who denies Jesus 3 times. On the most critical moment, the night Jesus was arrested, Peter denies him 3 times. How does Jesus respond to him when he sees him again for the first time? It's with gentleness and tenderness, and he restores Peter. And what about Thomas, who will not believe the testimony that Jesus has come back to life and just kind of doubts and rejects it? How does Jesus deal with him when he finally sees him about a week later? And he says, put your fingers in my scars, in the holes in my body. See and believe. Jesus is always dealing in gentleness and tenderness. Time and time again, we see that as his heart. It's not just words he says, but it's truly his heart. Jesus is gentle and lowly in heart. Gentle and lowly. And I think if the word gentle might catch us by surprise, how much more lowly? And lowly really describes kind of your position in life, kind of thrust down by the circumstances of life. So for example, an orphan who grew up on the streets, we might say they were very lowly and they came from very humble origins. And that's how Jesus describes himself and his heart, that he's very lowly. Now, how can this be? Right? I mean, how can this be? Is not Jesus King of Kings and Lord of Lords? Is he not the very fullness of God in every way? Is he not the object of all of heaven's worship? And one day will not all of heaven and earth bow down before him and give him all honor and glory? Well, yes. Yeah, those things are all true, yes. And yet, he's lowly. In Matthew 25, Jesus self-identifies himself with the least of these, the lowest on the social ladder of humanity. And he points out some specific examples, the people who are hungry, the poor, the starving, the thirsty, the stranger, those who are outcast and on the margins, the half-naked, the people who are sick, and the prisoners. And Jesus says, that group of people, these people on the very bottom rung of society, he says, whatever you do to them, you do to me. If you do good to them or if you ignore them, whatever it is, he goes, you do it to me because I am among them. That is who I am. Now, again, we see this demonstrated in his life. Jesus doesn't just say, I associate with these people or I'm lowly in heart. We see it played out in his life. Now, when we think about this, Jesus is unique in so many ways, right? I mean, the list is endless. But one of the ways Jesus is unique is that he's the only person who ever had a choice of how he would be born and the kind of life he would live, like the when, the how, and all those things. Like, you know, you and me, we just come into the world. But Jesus had a choice. King of heaven, coming down to our little world, and he could pick anything he wanted. And how was he born? In a stable to a very, very poor family. And first moments of his life, he's laid into an animal's feed box. He would then spend the rest of his life, the bulk of his life, working with his hands as a carpenter, earning just enough money to keep from starving. And through his life, and then certainly through his 3 years of ministry, Jesus didn't have any servants. He didn't go home to a palace when he came in off the road. In fact, he had no home to go back to. He was homeless, and when he died, he owned the clothes on his back, and that was it. And that was the kind of life Jesus chose for himself, because he's lowly in heart. Now, the greatest example of Jesus's lowly heart is his willingness to go to the cross. Now, we read this passage at the very beginning of the service in our call to worship, but I'm going to reread it again from Philippians 2 that demonstrates the lowly heart of Jesus. Jesus was equal with God, but Jesus didn't take advantage of that fact. Instead, he made himself nothing. He did this by taking on the nature of a servant. He was made just like human beings. He appeared as a man. He was humble and obeyed God completely. He did this even though it led to his death. Even worse, he died on a cross. The cross, the absolute lowest place Jesus could find himself. Truly, as Jesus was raised up on the cross, he descended to the lowest place. He was naked, penniless, punished as a criminal, mocked by his adversaries. Jesus on the cross, in the lowest place a human has ever been. You know, when Jesus tells us he's lowly, what he's telling us is that he is the most accessible person in the universe. The most accessible person in the universe. He's so low that there's no one beneath him. He's on the absolute bottom of the pile. That's where he places himself. And that's good news for you and me, because it means we can go to him. We can approach him. We all can. It doesn't matter if you're a king or a beggar, if you're a judge or an inmate, if you're the wealthy elite or you're in destitute poverty, if you're the class president and valedictorian, or you're the ignored, forgotten, overlooked person that nobody gives a second glance at. It doesn't matter. Jesus places himself beneath us so that we can all come to him. Understanding and accessible, gentle and lowly. Two of the most beautiful words we could have ever thought of to describe Jesus. This is so important for us to know and to spend this week and the coming weeks thinking about. And it's so important, not just because it's a heartwarming thing, but because we often have the wrong ideas about Jesus. We have the wrong ideas about him. Because we're not prone to think of Jesus as gentle and lowly. Think about this. Deep down, kind of in the center of your being, how often do you feel that God is just disappointed with you? He's disappointed with the choices you've made. He's disappointed with the direction that your life is going. He's disappointed with your past. How often do you think that, yes, Jesus might love me, but certainly God's patience with me is wearing thin, especially after I've committed that same sin for the 5,000th time. And that when you do sin, that he must be disgusted by it, and he must be frustrated by your constant need for forgiveness. I mean, just like in any human relationship, if you keep failing and faltering, and they're going to grow tired of you, right? They're going to their patience is going to wear out. Is that how God is? Not how Jesus comes to us, as gentle and lowly. And that's why we need this book. We need our Bibles to give us a correct understanding of who Jesus is. Jesus does not come to us reluctantly. He does not. Jesus is not like a parent who has to change their baby's diaper, their, wet, disgusting, stinky diaper, and, kind of with head turned, kind of nose in the shoulder, kind of, we'll do it because we have to do it. We don't want to do it. It's gross and it's disgusting, but okay, we'll do it because we really love them, but we would rather be doing anything else in the face of the earth than that. When Jesus comes to us, he's not cringing. He's not pinching his nose. Just like in the stories in the New Testament, he can't hold back his desire to enter into our life and into our sin and our suffering. It's who he is. It's his heart. I'd like to read a short excerpt from the book Gentle and Lowly that I think so beautifully captures that. A compassionate doctor has traveled deep into the jungle to provide medical care to a primitive tribe afflicted with a contagious disease. He has had his medical equipment flown in. He has correctly diagnosed the problem, and the antibiotics are prepared and available. He is independently wealthy and has no need of any kind of financial compensation. But as he seeks to provide care, the afflicted refuse. They want to take care of themselves. They want to heal on their own terms. Finally, a few brave young men step forward to receive the care being freely provided. What does the doctor feel? Joy. His joy increases to the degree that the sick come to him for help and healing. It's the whole reason he came. How much more if the diseased are not strangers, but his own family? So with us, and so with Christ. He does not get flustered and frustrated when we come to him for fresh forgiveness, for renewed pardon with distress and need and emptiness. That's the whole point. It's what he came to heal. He went down into the horror of death and plunged out through the other side in order to provide a limitless supply of mercy and grace to his people. So what do we do with this wonderful teaching that Jesus has a gentle and lowly heart? Well, we respond to his invitation that comes to us, and Verse 28, Jesus says, "Come to me. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, all who are working hard, all who are feeling the pressure and the weight of this world," which means all of us. Jesus says, "Come to me." And he says, "In coming to me, you will find rest for your souls." The deepest, most inner part of yourselves, you will find rest, which I think is another way of saying is just living in the reality of the gentleness and the lowliness of Jesus's heart, living in that, that it's not just a theoretical thing, but something we daily know and experience. Jesus says, "Come to me. I am gentle and lowly in heart, and I will give you this rest you so desire." It's so simple, and yet so many of us miss it. We miss it by not accepting Jesus' invitation to come to him, by not receiving this this invitation to salvation by rejecting Jesus and saying, no, we'll do it on our own, just like the people in the tribe. We will suffer on our own. We will find our own cure. Friends, Jesus is the only way. And that's why he comes to us. And he comes to us again, gentle and lowly. And to bring us through this life, but then through all eternity. You know, the Bible ends with this picture of the saints in heaven. It says, even then, he will wipe away every tear from their eyes. That is the heart of Jesus. He has come and hung on the cross. He has bled. He has died. He has paid the debt for your sin. He is raised up again to eternal life that you might be in heaven with him. And all he says is, come to me. Come to him by faith and trust in him. And if that's where you're at today, I hope and I pray that you will finally, on this day, right now in this moment, you will come to him. But I think those of us who have come to him as Christians, I think we also miss it too. And I think one of the ways we miss it is by not spending time with him daily. Let me ask you, do you have a quiet time daily? A time where you encounter Jesus, his gentle and lowly heart, whether it's through Bible study or worship or prayer, reflection, meditation, whatever you want to call it, where you just soak in it. You just soak in the reality of his gentleness and his lowly heart, and you draw near to him and find that refreshment. You know, Jesus doesn't just want us to come to him kind of based on knowledge and we agree with a set of doctrines, but truly to come to him daily, repeatedly, personally, in faith. So brothers and sisters out there, fellow believers, we are missing out on the very heart of Jesus when we just plow through life with our head down and never giving time or thought to being with Jesus. Now, why do we need to accept his invitation to come to him and to live in the reality of his gentle and lowly heart? Well, because he's not this way with everyone. Jesus, when he says he's gentle and lowly, it doesn't mean he's mushy or that he's weak or that he's spineless. We read in Matthew 11, right before this beautiful invitation in verses 20 through 24, Jesus talks about this wrath that's going to be poured out on these places where he's done his miracles and the people have rejected him and they have not repented him. And he said, it's going to be worse for you than it was for Sodom and the utter epic destruction that came on them. The wrath that was poured out from heaven upon them. So there's judgment. There's wrath. And yet for those who come to Jesus, you find limitless grace and you find his gentleness. But those who don't come to him don't find it. There is still that reality. And it's not Jesus's desire that we should be subject to wrath and judgment. And so much so that he has made a way. He's made a way for us through the cross to come to return to him. He is gentle and lowly, but he is not that way towards everyone. Only those who come to him and call him Savior and bow down before him. And so let me finish by reciting one more time Jesus' invitation to come to him, all who are weary and burdened, and in him and only in him will you find rest for your weary souls. Come to him.